Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by the fine members at grandtheftworld.com. This week in Grand Theft World history, we're at episode 129. This is the United Nations of Epstein. It was too dicey to put United Nations pedophiles in the title, so we had to kind of like euphemize it, if you will. There's a lot going on this week, and we'll get to the title story in a couple minutes. But first, Elon Musk came out and did a warning on the artificial intelligence and the highly intelligent machine life that they're bringing to the world. It's not really life. It's not really consciousness. People still haven't really figured out what consciousness is. So it's hard to create it. It's hard to tell if they've created it inadvertently. So there's a lot of dangers, a lot of interesting stories. Some of them are pretty scary. Robots killing people, these sort of things. Now, the United Nations had a conference on killer robots in 2013. So this has been 10 years that they've been building toward the things we're going to look into.
Yeah, so the danger, really, AI is perhaps more dangerous than, say, mismanaged aircraft design or production maintenance or bad car production, in the sense that it has the potential, however small one may regard that probability, but it is non-trivial. It has the potential of civilizational destruction. There's movies like Terminator, but it wouldn't quite happen like Terminator because the intelligence would be in the data centers.
Right.
The robot's just the end effector. But I think perhaps what you may be alluding to here is that regulations are really only put into effect after something terrible has happened.
That's correct.
If that's the case for AI, and we only put in regulations after something terrible has happened, it may be too late to actually put the regulations in place. The AI may be in control at that point.
You think that's real? It is conceivable that AI could take control and reach a point where you couldn't turn it off and it would be making the decisions for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely where things are headed, for sure. I mean, the things like say ChatGPT, which is based on GPT-4 from OpenAI, which is a company that I played a critical role in creating, unfortunately.
Back when it was a nonprofit?
Yes. I mean, the reason OpenAI exists at all is that Larry Page and I used to be close friends, and I would stay at his house in Palo Alto, and I would talk to him late into the night about AI safety. And at least my perception was that Larry was not taking AI safety seriously enough.
What did he say about it?
He really seemed to be want sort of digital superintelligence, basically digital God, if you will, as soon as possible.
He wanted that?
Yes. He's made many public statements over the years that the whole goal of Google is what's called AGI, artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence. No, and I agree with him that there's great potential for good, but there's also potential for bad. And so if you've got some radical new technology, you want to try to take the set of actions that maximize the probability it will do good and minimize the probability it will do bad things.
Yes.
It can't just be hell for leather. Let's just go, barreling forward and, hope for the best. And then at one point, I said, well, what about, we're going to make sure humanity's okay here. And then he called me a speciesist.
Did he use that term?
Yes, and there were witnesses. I wasn't the only one there when he called me a speciesist, and so I was like, okay, that's it. Yes, I'm a speciesist. Okay, you got me. What are you? Yeah, I'm fully a speciesist. Busted. So that was the last straw. At the time, Google had acquired DeepMind, and so Google and DeepMind together had about 3/4 of all the AI talent in the world. They obviously had a tremendous amount of money and more computers than anyone else. So I'm like, okay, we have a unipolar world here, where there's just one company that has close to a monopoly on AI talent and computers, like scaled computing. And the person who's in charge doesn't seem to care about safety. This is not good. So then I thought, what's the furthest thing from Google would be like a nonprofit that is fully open, because Google was closed for profit. So that's why the open in OpenAI refers to open source, transparency, so people know what's going on.
Yes.
And that we don't want to have like while I'm normally in favor of for-profit, we don't want this to be sort of a profit-maximizing demon from hell.
That's right.
That just never stops.
Right.
So that's how OpenAI would.
So you want specious incentives here, incentives that.
Yes, I think we want pro-human.
Yeah.
Like the future good for the humans.
Yes.
Yes, because we're humans.
So can you just put it? I keep pressing you, but just for people who haven't thought this through and aren't familiar with it, and the cool parts of artificial intelligence are so obvious. Write your college paper for you, write a limerick about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot there that's fun and useful. But can you be more precise about what's potentially dangerous and scary? Like, what could it do? What specifically are you worried about?
Going with old sayings, the pen is mightier than the sword. So if you have a super intelligent AI that is capable of writing incredibly well and in a way that is very influential, convincing, and is constantly figuring out what is more convincing to people over time, and then enters social media, for example, Twitter, but also Facebook and others, and potentially manipulates public opinion in a way that is very bad. How would we even know?
Accompanying that, we've got AI applied to the new world of flying machines. We're going to look at some of the new developments, both for civilians and military, in personal flying devices. RFK kicked off his presidential campaign this past week. He had heavy references to April 19th and the origins of the American Revolution kind of interwoven. So it's going to be interesting that a man with such a family legacy of popularity with the powers that be is going to step up. He's going to speak some truth to power. He's going to cause the existing regime some headaches, and they're looking forward to undermining his integrity every step of the way. So we'll take a couple looks at a couple clips of his longer speech, and we'll see what the gist is of his campaign.
So here's the New York Times reporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. entering the Democratic race, and they say that he is shaking Americans' faith in science because he challenged things like the lockdowns. And so that means he's shaking Americans' faith in science. And even though, by the way, in his kickoff speech, he didn't talk really very much at all about vaccines. I believe he mentioned vaccines once. I believe he mentioned vaccines once. What he really did is what Max Blumenthal says here. In announcing his presidential bid, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. delivered a blistering attack on the U.S. war state. RFK said Biden has made Ukraine a pawn in a geopolitical battle that has put the flower of Ukraine's youth into an avatar of death in order to exhaust Russia. Here is some of what RFK Jr. said.
Is this war in the U.S. national interest? We just need to isolate that question. Is it in the U.S. national interest? And there are, some of the leading pangerms of most respected people of our national diplomats. Let's say Henry Kissinger, Jack Matlock, Larry Wilkinson, who's Colin Powell's chief of staff. They all have said definitively, if you just want to ask, is it in our national interest? It is not. It is not in America's national interest to push Russia closer to China. That is a cataclysm. Number two, it's not in our national interest to do something that could involve us in a nuclear exchange with a country that has more nuclear weapons than us. We need to know as Americans, and we have a right to know, what is our government's chief objective in this war? Now, we were told initially that the objective was humanitarian. And that is a good reason to be there, a humanitarian. And what that means is trying to end the bloodshed and minimize it as much as possible. But in recent times, President Biden said that one of our objectives, at least, is regime change of Vladimir Putin.
That's when Biden went to Warsaw back in March 2022 and said, at the end of his speech, he was speaking off the cuff. He said, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, speaking about Putin. And
then they had to walk it back, didn't they?
Then they had to say, oh, he didn't mean to say that. Exactly. Yeah.
And this is the same strategy that did not work well for us in Iraq. And it's many of the same people who are around the neocons, who are around President Biden, who have been talking about that for a long time and have been engaged in geopolitical machinations in the Ukraine since 2014.
That's Kennedy calling out the proxy war in Ukraine. And here he is talking about the U.S. war state abroad and his plan to scale it back.
We are starving American people, and we are cutting them off from the kind of aid that we should be giving, that we're instead spending on being the policeman of the world. We have 800 bases around the world now. We spend $880 billion a year on our military. We were supposed to get a peace dividend. After the Soviet Union collapsed, we were supposed to go from 6 billion to 2 billion. That was a peace dividend. And then we were going to spend the rest, bring it home and build schools and infrastructure. Instead, we've made up a bunch of foreign enemies and different enemies and things that we got to do to spend more money. The military-industrial complex and the intelligence agencies are telling us instead of dropping it to 2, we raised it to 8.8.
And finally, here's RFK Jr. on the link between war, U.S.-fueled war, and poverty and oppression at home.
If you go back to the beginning of our history, our founders made so many clear warnings against Americans getting involved in foreign wars, because they said trying to be an imperium abroad is going to destroy democracy at home. It is going to turn us into a garrison state, a national security state, and a surveillance state.
Also, Biden, he told the CIA to cover up his son's laptop. So now, finally, years later, we find out the laptop's not only authentic and genuine and verified and was in the possession of the FBI, but that Biden from the top down told the CIA, cover this up. And the CIA said, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And we have 50 intelligence directors who will cover for you, sir. So they're willing to scuttle their trust and integrity to preserve the secrets on Hunter Biden's laptops. We're going to take a look at a couple clips tonight, because it's more than, scantily clad family members playing with Hunter with his crack cocaine and meth and stuff like that. There's a lot more. There's international deals with a variety of countries with whom the United States currently is doing a lot of business.
Let's talk about some of Hunter's business dealings. These are things that we know about, have been reported upon, and you would hope the widespread public would begin to understand. And the first real story we heard about was Hunter's connection to a Ukrainian energy company, Burisma, where he sat on the board and made $50,000 a month for approximately 5 years. Now, it's important to remember, Hunter had no experience in oil and gas, virtually no connections or no real-world credentials to get that job.
He had the one connection that mattered most. His last name was Biden, and his father was the vice president, with a portfolio of countries under his responsibility, one of which was Ukraine. By the way, a lot of suspicious activity reports start popping up inside the government, which has led to investigations validating what was found on the laptop. Here's one of them. Hunter Biden sought an annual $2 million retainer. Again, what does he know about Libya? Nothing. to aid in the recovery of frozen Libyan assets that were frozen on Muammar Gaddafi by Obama. His dad's vice president, he's trying to get him unfrozen. You can't make it up.
How about this one, Pete?
This is China. Think about this. This undermines American national security directly. He facilitated the sale of an American-operated cobalt mine for batteries so that it could be sold to the Chinese in 2016. So the Bidens make money, we lose the ability to produce electric batteries ourselves.
And finally, also one you may have become familiar with is Hunter Biden begins working with CEFC. It's a Chinese energy company that did that in 2017, and it is directly connected to the Chinese Communist Party. $1.3 million in payments, and we're going to show you where some of that went in just a moment.
And again, this is just what we know about, but we're not making, and this New York Times reported on this briefly, Business Insider reported on this, so this is not just laptop, this is outside as well.
Now, this is how the story began to unfold, if you'll remember. Let's take a quick review of the history. In April of 2019, John Paul Mac Isaac receives the laptop in Delaware.
So months later, he's got to wait for him not to pick it up. He thought he would pick it up. He didn't. So in September of 2019, he contacted the FBI. Hey, I got this laptop.
And John Paul Mac Isaac told me on the Will Cain podcast, hey, I tried to talk to the FBI. I tried to get them to take it. They weren't interested. They show up in December of 2019 to finally get the laptop.
And he's also gives the laptop to some other folks as well to say, hey, if the FBI is not going to pay attention, maybe you should. July of 2020. So get this. The FBI has the laptop and has had it for months, 7 months, and they start briefing Twitter executives on the potential threat to elections, a hack and dump that could hypothetically happen based on disparaging information of a candidate.
And then right before the election, Facebook is warned about potential misinformation campaigns.
Again, Facebook, Twitter, alerted by the FBI about something that might happen because the FBI knows it's going to happen.
Let's zoom in on the timeline just for a moment and show the impact of all of this. So in October of that year, again, the election is a few weeks away, the New York Post releases the report of Hunter Biden's laptop.
Absolutely, they did. I hope that cursor up there on the top is intentional because it's Hunter Biden's laptop. Anyway, if it's not, no worries. October 19th, so just 5 days later, so they know the story's going to pop. It does pop. When it does, they realize we need a defense of this. And what should we scream? Russia, 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 like we have forever. So we learned that inside the campaign team, starting with Antony Blinken, they reach out to Intel folks and they get 51 of them to sign a letter denouncing this report as having the hallmarks of Russian misinformation.
Quickly, then the debate is held.
But that's the key. They knew they had to do it here so that 3 days later at the debate, Joe Biden could say, nope,
51
just Russian
CIA,
misinformation. Nothing to see here.
Then Joe Biden wins the election in December of 2020. Hunter Biden, it's finally confirmed there's an investigation into his, at that point, all we hear about is his tax affairs. But there's an investigation. Now, let's talk about, as I mentioned earlier, who are the key players in this entire story? It's not just about Hunter.
No, it's not. So first of all, the most key player is the guy that looks just like James Biden, and it's Joe Biden, right? The big guy is the key player in the investigation. But who are all the other actors? Well, this is Joe Biden's brother, James Biden, Hunter's uncle, who is central to business dealings as well.
So as these go through, I want to tell you, he, that we know of, has received approximately $360,000 in payments from Chinese companies.
Haley Biden, widow of Beau Biden, temporary girlfriend of Hunter Biden, also received family cash. This is Rob Walker, who we know specifically received $869,000 in Chinese cash. This is not right. Rob Walker, because I don't know why we don't have a photo of him, but maybe it's hard.
Same with Eric Schwerin, who's a big business partner as well of Hunter Biden. He's been described as a close friend. Then, of course, there's Antony Blinken. And the importance of Antony Blinken, we learned this week, is he helped organize that letter of 51 big intel guys to say it's Russian disinformation.
He cashed in nicely on that. He's got a pretty plum spot in the Secretary of State.
Absolutely.
Antony Blinken, but he was very, very political at the beginning. And then you've got the IRS whistleblower, who right now is central to putting it all together. Remember, they ignored Tony Bobolinsky. They ignored a lot of other business associates who are willing to say, Joe was in on the conversation. Joe knew everything. He is the big guy. He was getting money. We'll see through House Republicans if these investigations will lead to something beyond just tax crimes.
And because we're just scratching the surface of this story.
For sure.
So we're going to look at stories like that. Seeing and hearing is no longer believing. We're going to have an intermission tonight from Truth Stream Media, because in the world of AI and deepfakes, and 11 labs doing people's voices and all these sort of things, it's becoming harder and harder to discern whether or not what you're seeing is genuine and authentic, or if it's created by AI. So we're going to have to start to learn how to use our brain power again to discern, to pick up on the contradictions, and to resolve these things so we can have knowledge, understanding, experience, skills, truth into the future. Because if we fail further to discern truth from fiction, it could be deleterious to the survival of humanity.
I just thought it would be good to be on camera to discuss this one with you, because everything is getting increasingly very weird. To that end, let's talk about the uncanny valley for a second. I feel like we're personally living there. I don't know about you. It's not something that people have an easy time defining, but you know it when you see it because you also feel it in the place in your brain that activates your fight or flight response. The place in your brain where your nightmares are born. It's when something looks like it's alive, but it's not. And the valley is actually a giant gulf between those two things. Something that's not alive, but looks like it could be. Hopefully not creaking across your floor at night while you're trying to sleep. This includes anthropomorphized things that mimic human traits and emotions.
I invited a friend of mine over to have a little dinner. I'd like to meet him. Here he is, the letter M.
But are not human. And whatever this is. I don't know, everything feels just weird. Everything just feels weird to me right now. More than normal, I think everything feels weird probably all the time for the whole of my life. But now, in particular, let me just specify, I feel like everything has gotten weirder to an uncomfortable degree. But it's in this environment, right, that we're now seeing AI get to a point where it is becoming indistinguishable from reality. I mean, it was one thing to talk about that years ago, theoretically, as a future point on this channel, and we've made multiple videos about this, okay? But now we're there. We're officially there at this point. And whatever the technology is right now is only going to get more sophisticated from this point on, and we're already there. So this transformation is taking place right now, and we're living in it, which is crazy. It's kind of exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying.
Hi. Are you lost, sweetheart? Are you afraid, honey? Well, why don't you come with me?
But it's also just kind of insane.
Alluring photos of a woman named Claudia have caught the attention of lovesick Reddit users. The catch? Claudia is not a real person. She's an AI image generated by the program Stable Diffusion. 2 computer scientists created her as a joke to catfish men and make cash selling her nudes.
Technology is able to fool a voice identification system that's used by the Australian government to secure the private information of millions of people.
And last but not least, the United Nations advocates to end What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come